You have to specify certain things I do not agree with Morton Smith on.
Do you agree with Morton Smith on everything he ever wrote?
No.
Do you disagree with him on everything he ever wrote?
No.
This is how the episodes...
This is what we're recording first. I don't know what's going to be there at the beginning. Listen, at some point we started recording and we just talked about gerbils for like 90 seconds, so...
this might be more germane.
Germane
the gerbils.
Boy. There may or may not be gerbil Polity Matters stickers at General Assembly this year. The Polity Matters General Assembly gerbil.
We've given up on ice cream.
We'll
see. We've got to segue to a new icon.
My wife asked me the other day, she's like, do you guys talk about ice cream anymore? I'm like, well, it's really lost its flavor. It's just, not here very often anymore.
I tweet it occasionally.
That's true, you do. Hello, welcome to Polity Matters. My name's Ben Ratliff. I'm joined by my friends Scott Edberg and Jared Nelson. And we are here to get the work done. I don't know. I always have banter in my notes at this point in the outline, which seems sort of useless, but everybody good?
Like Anchorman, it just says like air quotes like banter.
That's right.
Insert banter here. Just read it. Read the teleprompter.
I mean, everybody's thawed out. Everybody's, I'm starting to feel GA more. I signed up for a luncheon the other day for General Assembly.
Oh, they have those out already.
There's at least one. I don't think they've publicized it much, but it's on the internet. I've got ruling elders starting to plan their travel.
Mm-hmm.
It's exciting.
An exciting
year. So exciting.
So glad I signed up for Overtures Committee. I want to read through 60 or 70 overtures. What's it going to be? What's the over-under, Scott?
I'm saying 100.
Ooh.
I'm going all out for 100. I don't know if I want to do the screen this year. I don't want to manage that screen. It's just going to be too much. So, Jared, do you want to manage the screen if you're on Overtures? It's like a 2-for-1.
I'm not good with technology. I'm the old guy here.
Yeah, you are kind of old. Too old to be running the screen. God,
you might be a safe middle to be running the screen.
All right, listeners, if there's someone out there that'll be a GA by Overtures convening and you want to run the screen, please reach out to Ben Ratliff. Take it off my plate, please. It's a cry for help.
Did you just hand it to me inadvertently? How did that happen?
You're just a middleman.
You just made me responsible for finding the guy. I don't like that. Man. I'm already on a different COC. I cannot volunteer to run the screen. So, anybody else out there? We're in BCO 54 today, which is on the worship of God by offerings. And this is contentious. Talk about hot topics. We are really getting into it. I think I don't have anything to say. We're just going to start. 54:1. The Holy Scriptures teach that God is the owner of all persons and all things, and that we are but stewards of both life and possessions. That God's ownership and our stewardship should be acknowledged, that this acknowledgement should take the form, in part, of giving at least a tithe of our income and other offerings to the work of the Lord through the Church of Jesus Christ, thus worshiping the Lord with our possessions, and that the remainder should be used as becomes Christians. I think everybody's going to be on board with the beginning parts of this, right? The principles they're laying out. Ownership of everything, right? God owns everything. And so when we start the conversation about offerings and giving, we start with theology proper. God owns everything. You got to love the first phrases, right? He's the owner of all persons and all things, and we, in relation to those things, are just stewards, both of life, that is, of persons and possessions related to things. And so giving as worship flows out of that in a stewardship way. I don't know where you guys want to go. I mean, I think it's not even talking about it happening in the regular worship services. It's just talking about the principle of giving as an act of worship.
Well, this is important for American Presbyterianism, especially because it is not an established church. That was part of the preliminary principles. And so it would not be supported by the financial givings of the state necessarily. And so the people have to support it. And this is something that many Presbyterians have been used to doing, especially Scottish Presbyterians, as they often were, like the Covenanters, persecuted and not part of the established church, and therefore had to have a practice of supporting the church themselves rather than through their taxes. So that's an important principle that I think is here, is the people's support of the work of the church. This is something that our church emphasized before I got to it, in that there's a great limitation on doing things like fundraisers and things like that, because the thought is, if the people of the church are not supporting it, we shouldn't ask the community to support the church. The church should be supporting the church. The people in the church should be. And we can help support other churches, but we shouldn't ask the community to support the church financially in such a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's just the general stewardship that just shows that we are responsible and have culpability for how we use our money, our time, and our lives. And we are to be living sacrifices for the Lord Jesus Christ, and that means our gifting as well. How do we use the things that the Lord has blessed us with in our lives? And so we are stewards of our whole life, not just our financial part of the life, and all of that is to the end of the glory of God. And since God is the owner of it, we will have responsibility before Him. You think of the various parables, the parables of the talents, and how the Lord requires of us to use the gifts He's given to us for the purpose of His kingdom. And so we are stewards of it. They don't belong to us ultimately. They are given to us to invest in His kingdom and for His glory.
And we'll talk about tithe in just a second. We'll circle back to it. But just to finish off kind of the broad principle, the end, right? The remainder. So we give, but then the remainder should be used as becomes Christians. So it's not that we give a certain amount to God and then the rest we can use for ourselves, our lives and everything, but that our whole life is one of stewardship, that God's given us everything, including our lives. We add our redemption on the top of that. And so everything that we have, everything who we are, we give back to Him in the way that we live our lives as Christians. So a great sort of all-encompassing philosophy of life in this 54:1. But let's talk about tithe. This can be heated debate in some circles, right? I know guys that'll start fighting if somebody demands that people give a tithe to the church, right? Tithe was typically 10% in the Old Testament, but it wasn't just one tithe. I don't have any notes written down on this, by the way, so you guys might correct me if my memory's off, but
3.
If I remember right, there's 3, and it adds up to something a little beyond 30% in the long run. Like if we actually were going to give the tithes the Old Testament demanded, it would be somewhere near 30% of our possessions, assets, however you would want to think through it, because they weren't dealing only in currency when they were talking about tithes. It was a lot of different types of things. But yeah, and so that's one side of it, right? Is that guys are going to say, well, the tithe is from the Old Testament, and so you can't apply it in the New Testament. But the BCO here is obviously saying a tithe is sort of, in their language, is the base, right? At least a tithe. You guys come at it.
It's good to distinguish between tithes and offering. Tithes are what is required of us. Offering is over and above, beyond. And so I think that's how, at least I've always understood it, is that the tithe is what God requires. Offering was freely given, free will offerings, think of the Old Testament. And so there's a distinction there. And how Christians have applied this in the church is obviously different. Some would say that the tithe is abolished from the Old Testament perspective, and that everything we give is an offering. I tend to say every Sunday when I lead the offering, at least when I used to, is present to God His tithes and your offerings. Always a both and. Give what is required to God, but also offer freely what you have to Him as well.
Actually, I really like the language here of at least a tithe. I remember when I was first trying to look into this issue, I believe it was an article by T. David Gordon and an article by R.C. Sproul. And I believe it was Sproul was arguing that the tithe is still valid, and Gordon was arguing that the tithe was tied to the Mosaic law. But what was funny was, at the end, they both ended up saying, a tithe was the Old Testament, and so being part of the New Covenant, that should be our floor. We should be doing probably more than that. And so it's interesting that there's a big debate and you end up in the same place. The one thing I would say, though, is I do find it interesting in the theology of the tithe that Abraham tithed to Melchizedek. That's pre-Mosaic law. So that principle, I think, is valid beyond the Mosaic law. Not necessarily that shows that it's, a tithe is still in effect, but that's a good principle. 10% is a good base to go from. And then, as Scott said, thinking of above and beyond that for other things would be good too.
Well, I mean, we all know, and most of our listeners are going to agree, 10% is enough to feel it, right? Like, I can tell that we're given to the church, right? When I know when I'm getting paid and things like that. My pastoral advice to folks most of the time is, it's actually, if I had ever read the directory before just like 5 minutes ago, I would have seen this. Jokes. But at least a tithe is good principled advice for folks when they come asking. How much should I give to the church? Give to the church. Start with a tithe if you can. That's a good place to start. Try to do that. But of course, give what you can. If you're in a situation in life where it's very, very difficult to find 10%, giving less than that's not wrong, but tithe is generally a good principle of a starting place.
Gross or net?
Talk about that? Yeah. Oh, well,
My wife is the financial person, so I just let her figure that out.
Yeah, I let my wife figure that out too. I struggle with giving generally. I'm thinking through this as a call for the Christian to support. I grew up with a decent amount of poverty, and I remember when my mom was making $30,000 a year, I thought we were rich. And so giving has never been like a huge staple in our family system growing up, just because we didn't have much to give. And so even today, I have to constantly fight against hoarding. So I feel almost like I'm from the Great Depression or something, where it's like I gotta protect my family's wealth the best I can. And so I sometimes struggle with this. I mean, we give freely, and we set aside money ahead of time for our tithes at least. But I've always found it hard to be free in giving. I'm always encouraged by Christians who just freely give away their money to good causes, to those in needs very quickly. I'm always like, well, let me go check my budget. And my wife is a little better at that, and we can just give it. She's in a different family system than I. But I've always struggled just because I think of my upbringing, almost like a Great Depression family system. How do you guys, is it easier, harder for you? Your wife just do it?
We kind of go back and forth. It just depends. I manage our finances. I'm a part of that conversation, but we usually just every year set what we're going to give every month, and we still try to write a check and drop it in the plate just because it's a physical, that kind of action is helpful for us. We'll do online if if Caitlin's out a lot, which she has been lately, but yeah, and we stick to that. And then, beyond that regular, like, I like the way you described tithe and offerings. I'm not sure this chapter agrees with your terminology as much, but if we think about that part as our tithe, what we owe, what belongs to him, and then offerings being that freely stuff. Like, we've got different things in our church that'll come up from time to time. Like, around Christmas time, we usually give to that. What's that fund that the PCA puts together for widows and of pastors? I forget the name of it.
It's not the Lonnie Moon one. That's a Southern Baptist, right?
It's a Southern Baptist one. Anyway, so we'll usually write a check for that when time comes around, when our church is collecting for those particular kinds of things, and that that would be more of an offering type. So ours is pretty spreadsheeted to some degree, but we've seen a blessing. I mean, the Lord's been kind to provide what we need beyond what we give. So
now, I don't always take pearls of wisdom from Rick Warren, but I was kind of impressed when he.
This title of this episode is The Pearls of Wisdom from Rick Warren.
Pearls of Wisdom.
But I believe it was him that, when he wrote The Purpose-Driven Life, whatever you think of it, that it was such a big... No, I'm going somewhere with this.
Whatever you think of it.
The first line is great. The rest of it doesn't quite follow. Anyway, but I believe I heard him say that when they got the royalties from it, it was way more than they needed, and they reverse tithed it. They said, we'll keep a tenth of it, and we'll give 90% of it away. So it's not... I mean, tithe isn't... the law of the land. I do think it's important to think about, though, like with inheritance or something like that. We've had that happen before, and we thought, okay, we need to do something with that, whether it's giving or, this is more than we expected. And so some of it going to missionaries and things like that, too.
Girls from Rick Warren.
I've mentioned Southern Baptist twice now, so.
I know.
54-2. It is both a privilege and a duty. plainly enjoined in the Bible to make regular, weekly, systematic, and proportionate offerings for the support of religion and for the propagation of the gospel in our own and foreign lands and for the relief of the poor. This should be done as an exercise of grace and an act of worship, and at such time during the service as may be deemed expedient by the session. So here we go. We've got the principle of giving in the first paragraph, and in the second they tell us, and you should do it in the worship service, and it should be used for these purposes. So, while tithe might be a discussion, right, how much somebody should give, also up for debate is whether this should happen in the worship service or not. Maybe not quite as hot button as the tithe is, but nevertheless. Jared, I see you, man. Come on. What does Rick Warren have to say about this? That's what I want to know.
Well, I do find the language of weekly interesting in that not everybody does it weekly. Maybe they do it by their paycheck, or even having a box at the back that it's not collected during the service. So I kind of chafe under some of this, it is a duty to weekly do this and as an act of worship. Does that mean it's an element? It says it is in chapter 47. Don't know if that'll be in the revised directory or not, or maybe we do. I don't know. But
maybe we do.
I kind of go back and forth, though, because, giving is, in a sense, an act of worship, right? Just doesn't need to be an element set aside as you're passing the plate. Passing the plate is kind of new. It used to be that there's boxes in the back, or that it was taxes, if you go back far enough. So what exactly is this saying? I could probably live with it and just stop having my little soapbox of whether or not you need to collect offerings during the service. I realized in reading Morton Smith, he doesn't even think that this chapter requires that. So maybe I just need to calm down.
Well, technically, this chapter requires nothing of anyone. If we're on the record, technically speaking.
This whole directory doesn't require anything.
Right,
yeah. Except for a few chapters.
The argument would be, what, element versus circumstance? Would that be the most charitable way to categorize the argument for having it in the service, is that if you don't believe it's an element, maybe you believe that it's circumstantial, that the easiest way for the deacons to collect, as they've been told to collect, is to pass the plates during the worship service.
Yeah, 1 Corinthians 16, it was obvious that when they got together on the first day of the week, that offerings were collected. Now, was that because they'd gathered together? Was that a part of their worship service? That's the question that's there. I do think the manner of collecting it is actually something that you see in the chapter on deacons. They devise the best methods of doing that, which is good today through the PCA. Is it through the foundation or through Geneva? I think it's foundation. Our deacons and elders have set this up. I'm not the financial guy, but you can get online donations. And so there's some people who have it set up to just take it out of their account. It allows them to, they didn't forget their checkbook if they have a checkbook anymore. There are new methods now because of the changing of, we're a cashless and maybe checkless society. And
Scott,
we have a QR code at the back too.
Jared keeps talking about this book that I've never heard of before. A check book?
I have a checkbook for one purpose, and it is literally to write checks for church service. I don't use it for anything else.
Same in the Ratliff's household, yeah.
I do think it is important to have visually accessible ways of giving to the church for your children's sake. If you just auto draft everything you give away, I think that your children will miss that almost totally, because they're not going to come by dad while he, gives to the church on Friday night, through the web page, the splash page. Look how much we just gave.
Let them click the button on your mouse.
But I think there's something of value to say, here we are giving back to the Lord. John Owen, would you like to put that in the offering plate today? And there's a tangible seeing. When we were doing fundraising, and my son still talks about it, fundraising for our capital campaign to renovate our building, my son will still come up to me when he makes money and says, can I put this in the offering plate to help build our church? And so there is like a tangible sense of giving. If we did everything just digitally or virtually, they would have no sense that we ever even gave to the church for the service of God's people. And so I think there is something about the tangible experience for passing on the spirit of giving to your children. And so whatever that looks like, whether that's a box in the back at Jared's church or during the service, I think having a tangible way to give helps your children sense the giving spirit of the home.
Yeah, OPC has a practice, which I know some others do as well. It suggests during communion that part of the communion service is a giving of offering for the poor. And so if that's a separate offering, that's different. Even if you're not doing it weekly, having some sort of an element within the service in which you're being reminded of that by a deacon's offering or an offering for the poor, I think is a great idea. I mentioned this recently to our deacons, saying we are doing so many things auto. It might be good for us to institute something like this in some service in which we do some special offerings to remind people of the importance. So I think that's a good word.
Just to speak a little more to the content of the paragraph there, what's the money for, right? When we give it, the support of religion, propagation of the gospel locally and in foreign lands, and for the relief of the poor. So the support of the church itself, and then for meeting the needs of those around, presumably the context there, relief of the poor is of those poor in the church first. We've talked about this back with deacons and things, and then churches can extend out as they choose. All right. Regular, weekly, systematic, proportionate. I think that'd be cool if there was an or right there instead of an and. Those are good words to think through when you're thinking about giving. Maybe not so prescribed.
Yeah, my church does not give on a weekly basis. It's just so funny. Like every week, it's like goes all the way up, and then the next week is all the way down, and it's like, how is there only $1,000 in the offerings this week? And then it goes all the way up, and so my people they seem to be all on the same pay schedule.
Yeah,
but we mostly have people that are engineers working at Boeing, so I guess that makes sense. They all get paid at the same time, and they all give at the same time. But I'd probably be more consistent if I gave bi-weekly than weekly, because you sometimes miss a tithe here and there and it gets lost.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the last section in this chapter is 54:3. It is appropriate that the offerings be dedicated by prayer. Anybody want to argue? There's this I don't think is going to be a hot button issue in any way.
Well, here you go. Here you go.
Prayer, very controversial. Rick Warren doesn't pray after his collections. Great Presbyterian pioneer.
Oh man, I'm getting roasted today. So, I think there's maybe three different possibilities for this prayer, though. One is I've thought more and more about, I need to include this in the pastoral prayer if we don't have a separate element. So if you're not having a time in which you're passing the plate, is there a time in which this is being prayed for? And so this was a reminder to me. But another is, I remember when I first came to the church and we were passing the plate, there was, my practice had been to pray after. They would collect the offerings and you pray over the offering. And the very first time we did it, they came to the front and they just kind of looked at me like, you're supposed to pray before. I'm like, oh, so it doesn't tell you when. So I'm sure there's some churches that pray before, some that pray after. I don't know if it really matters, but it caught me off guard.
Cool. Well, here I have a
Cool story, bro. That's what we basically just said to him.
Man, I'm so sorry.
Look, this is a short section. We need content, right?
No, I appreciate it. It is appropriate that we say something about that sentence. This will give us a little more because we've only been going for 25 minutes. I think this is probably more common in some older Presbyterian churches and certainly more common outside of the Presbyterian church. Do you make a point to preach or teach on giving on a regular basis in the life of your church? Just out of curiosity, and we can talk about the merits or demerits. Go ahead, Scott. Well,
I haven't noticed any difference in patterns, whether I preach on giving or not. I mean, we did like a little mini series on this, I think right before we did our building campaign, but I've not noticed any difference. My deacons always ask me, hey, can you do a one-off sermon on giving? And I have not noticed. I mean, our people aren't giving any more or less. Like, we're doing poorly. Our finances seem to be on the up, but I've not noticed any actual tangible differences between whether I do it or not. Though I do it.
Yeah, again, the section on the deacons talk about encouraging the grace of liberality of giving. And so I've told our deacons, if this is a need, you need to let me know in order that I might know to emphasize it. Otherwise, it's just going to come up when we're preaching through. And I don't know of any major sections other than, unless you're preaching through Malachi or preaching through 2 Corinthians, in which that's going to be a major focus. So sometimes it does require, inserting it in somewhere. Otherwise, it's just going to be when you're going through the book on those topics.
Yeah. There's a traditional element of some, especially in Mississippi, I've seen it a lot in some of these older Presbyterian churches to do, they called it faith promise, which was usually directed more at missions giving. So a church would want to know, what are we going to do about missions this year? And so ask people to say, what are you going to give beyond your regular tithes so that we can allocate? I have heard of some churches that will ask to do something similar, but a pledge for the tithe for the year so that they can basically write their budget on what people promise to give. At our church, we don't practice any of this. Our pastor famously doesn't. We don't do that. We don't do any kind of like pledge thing, but he famously won't preach unique sermons on giving. He just preaches through wherever he is. And we're grateful to the Lord. I think to your point, Scott, it doesn't seem to make a difference when it happens versus not happening.
It seems like when their need arises, the people will rise.
Yeah.
If you're in the midst of talking about renovating a building, buying a building, those kind of plans that you might actually have a special fund to complete, people will give, and they'll give sacrificially. And so, you should probably do some groundwork to make sure that that it's viable internally. If your leadership isn't going to back it, then you probably will fail at the building campaign stuff. But yeah, the people will rise up when the time is needed for special needs.
And this is a good reminder, I think, too, because if we never talk about it and our kids grow up in the church and they never hear about it, they're not going to know about it. So, at least once every 10 years, some kid will hear about it at some point,
H.B. Charles has a great story that he tells. So at his church in Jacksonville, every May is Giving May, and so he preaches every Sunday in May on giving and financial stuff and everything. And so there was one Sunday in May he was going to preach on Malachi 3, not to rob, why have you robbed me and stuff. But it happened to be Mother's Day, and so another friend of his was in town or something and said, "Hey HB, what are you gonna preach on Mother's Day? What are you gonna tell the moms on Mother's Day?" And HB said, "I'm gonna tell them not to rob God." And that was anyway. I'll follow to that.
Hey, Ben cited a Baptist too. I just want to point that out.
Yes, they are on equal standing in my sight.
Oh,
Which
man.
way, oh Baptist men?
Just to keep up the theme that Jared has so kindly given to us, as Rick Warren would say, this podcast is over. Thanks for joining us and being here for our discussion on BCO 54, the worship of God by offerings. We were glad to have you. If you'd like to give to support the work of Polity Matters, beyond your tithe to your local church, you can't count it towards that. You can click the link below to support our work. We are in the process of getting swag together. And I don't say this only to get you guys to support us, although that is helpful, but we'll give swag to pretty much anybody. It doesn't take a whole lot for us to hand you something. So let us know what kind of swag you're interested in. We're still trying to figure out the details. We've got some ideas, but we are trying to figure out some merch, make some decisions and some purchases to bring to Louisville in June. So stay tuned for that. If you're not following us on social media, make sure you are by the end of today. Make sure you're subscribed in your podcast app of choice so you don't miss anything. We are ramping up for GA. We're already starting to talk about different things related to it in the background and have some stuff planned, and we're excited. And also, disappointed and upset, because who wants to talk about General Assembly all year long? Certainly not any of us. That's all I have to say. Until next time, say goodbye, gentlemen.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Y'all take care.